Sarah Miller wiped sweat from her brow as she brought the axe down again on the stubborn log. The wood finally split with a crack that echoed across the empty yard. 6 months pregnant and alone in her isolated cabin. She paused to catch her breath, one hand supporting her swollen belly. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first heavy snow of the season. She needed more firewood, much more, if she hoped to survive the winter. Thomas would have had this done weeks ago. Thomas would have. But Thomas was gone. Sarah blinked back tears as she reached for another log. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. She squinted at the lone rider appearing on the horizon, her heart hammering in her chest. Nobody came this far out unless they had purpose. She dropped the axe and backed toward the cabin, her eyes never leaving the approaching stranger. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Sarah's hand closed around Thomas's rifle just inside the cabin door. She'd never fired it at anything larger than a rabbit, but the stranger didn't need to know that. The rider slowed his approach, a tall man with his hat pulled low against the wind. His coat was weathered and his horse looked tired. Not a bandit, she hoped, but these days it was hard to tell who was dangerous and who wasn't. "That's far enough," she called out, raising the rifle to her shoulder with as much confidence as she could muster. Her voice didn't waver, despite the fear tightening her throat. The stranger reined in his horse and slowly raised his hands. "Ma'am, I don't mean you any harm." His voice was deep, roughened by the cold. "Just looking for shelter before this storm hits. Been riding 2 days straight." Sarah kept the rifle steady. "There's a town 15 miles east. You can find shelter there." The man glanced at the darkening sky. "Won't make it before the storm hits. I can sleep in your barn, pay you for the trouble." He nodded toward her woodpile. "Could help with that too, if you'd like." Sarah hesitated. The small pile of wood she'd managed to chop wouldn't last 2 weeks of winter, let alone 4 months. Her back ached constantly now, and the work was getting harder each day as the baby grew. But letting a stranger stay, a strong gust of wind blew across the yard, carrying the first snowflakes. The baby kicked inside her, as if offering an opinion. "What's your name?" she asked, not lowering the rifle. "Jack Reynolds." He kept his hands visible. "I give you my word, ma'am. Just need shelter for a night or two." Sarah studied him. Broad shoulders, strong hands. A face that had seen sun and wind, but eyes that didn't seem cruel. She made her decision as the snow began falling in earnest. "The barn's around back. You can stable your horse there." She lowered the rifle slightly. "I expect that woodpile to be twice as big by tomorrow evening." Jack nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Sarah watched as he led his horse toward the barn, her hand protectively covering her belly. Thomas would call her a fool for this, but Thomas wasn't here to chop wood or fix the leaking roof before winter set in. Thomas wasn't here to help when the baby came. She returned to the cabin and set water to boil for tea, keeping the rifle within reach. Through the window, she saw Jack leading his horse into the barn. Minutes later, she heard the rhythmic thunk of the axe splitting wood. Sarah sank into Thomas's chair by the fire, feeling the baby shift inside her. 2 months since the bank robbery that took Thomas from her. 2 months of neighbors bringing food and sympathy, until the visits gradually stopped. The town was too far for regular trips, especially in her condition. Now winter was coming, and she was alone with a child on the way. Outside, the steady sound of splitting would continue as darkness fell. Jack worked until he could barely see, then carried an armload of split logs to stack by the cabin door. Sarah opened at his knock, the rifle still in her hand. "Thought you might need some inside for tonight," he said, snow melting on his shoulders. "I'll bring in more tomorrow." Sarah stepped aside to let him enter. The warmth of the cabin embraced them both after the biting cold outside. "Put them by the hearth," she directed, watching him carefully. Jack moved with the deliberate care of a man used to being perceived as a threat, keeping his movements slow and predictable. After arranging the logs, he straightened and removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with early gray at the temples. "Something smells good," he said, glancing toward the pot hanging over the fire. Sarah hadn't planned to feed him, but the day's exertion had left her hungry too. "Stew. Not much meat in it." She hesitated, then added, "There's enough for 2. Jack nodded his thanks and remained standing until she gestured toward the small table. He sat while she ladled stew into bowls, watching as she maneuvered around the kitchen with her pregnant belly. "When's the baby due?" he asked. "About 3 months," Sarah answered, setting a bowl before him. "Early February, if my counting's right." Jack frowned. "Rough time for a birth, middle of winter." "I'm aware." Sarah's tone was clipped as she sat across from him. She didn't need reminding of the danger. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the fire crackling in the hearth and wind whistling around the cabin's eaves. The storm was picking up outside. "Your husband," Jack began, then seemed to reconsider his question. "Died 2 months ago." Sarah stared into her stew. "Bank robbery in town. He was a teller." Jack's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "I'm sorry to hear that." Something in his voice made Sarah look up sharply, but his expression revealed only appropriate sympathy. She continued eating, the silence stretching between them. "How long have you been on the road?" she asked finally. "Few weeks." Jack kept his answer vague. "Moving south for the winter. Got caught by the early snow." "Where are you headed?" Jack shrugged. "Wherever work is. I do odd jobs, ranch work mostly." Sarah didn't believe him entirely, but didn't press. As long as he chopped wood and then moved on, his business was his own. After dinner, Jack insisted on cleaning the dishes while Sarah rested. She watched him from Thomas's chair, the rifle across her lap. Despite her wariness, it was a relief to have someone else handling chores for a change. "There's a leak in the roof above the back room," she found herself saying. "Been meaning to fix it before the snow." Jack nodded. "I'll take a look tomorrow." "Got tools?" "In the shed." Thomas kept everything organized. Her voice caught slightly on her husband's name. "Get some rest, Mrs. Miller. I'll see to the horse and sleep in the barn." Jack dried his hands and reached for his coat. "Lock the door behind me." Sarah followed him to the door, watching as he disappeared into the swirling snow toward the barn. She slid the bolt into place, then leaned her forehead against the rough wood. The baby kicked again, a reassuring flutter inside her. "It's all right," she whispered. To the baby or herself, she wasn't sure. "We'll manage." That night, she slept better than she had in weeks, lulled by the knowledge that someone else was watching over the property, even if that someone was a stranger. Morning brought a transformed world outside her window. 6 inches of snow blanketed the yard, with more still falling. Sarah stirred the fire to life and put coffee on to boil. Her back ached from yesterday's exertions, but at least she'd slept. A knock at the door announced Jack's arrival. He stomped snow from his boots before entering, bringing the scent of winter with him. "Storm's setting in properly," he reported. "Might last a couple days from the look of it." Sarah handed him a cup of coffee. "So much for moving on tomorrow." Jack accepted the coffee with a nod. "If you'd rather I tried for town." "No," Sarah cut him off. "The pass can be dangerous in snow. Besides," she gestured toward the window, "you promised me a woodpile." A hint of a smile touched Jack's lips. "That I did." After a simple breakfast, Jack headed outside while Sarah busied herself with mending. Through the window, she watched him moving between the woodpile and barn, working steadily despite the falling snow. By midday, the pile of split logs had grown impressively. When he came in for dinner, his face was reddened by cold but satisfied. "Roof next," he said, warming his hands by the fire. "Snow's letting up a bit." True to his word, he spent the afternoon on the cabin roof, patching holes and securing loose shingles. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as each task was completed. Jobs that had been hanging over her head since Thomas's death, now being handled efficiently by capable hands. 3 days passed in similar fashion. The storm lingered, dropping over a foot of snow before finally breaking. Each morning, Sarah expected Jack to announce his departure, but each day brought a new task. Fixing the chicken coop, reinforcing the barn door, hunting rabbit for the stew pot. They settled into an uneasy rhythm, their conversations gradually extending beyond immediate necessities. On the 4th evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sarah finally voiced the question that had been bothering her. "Why are you still here, Mr. Reynolds?" Jack looked up from the harness he was mending. "Storm just cleared. Roads will be bad for another day at least." "That's not what I'm asking." Sarah set aside her knitting. "You could have left this morning. The pass would be passable for a single rider." Jack's hands stilled on the leather. He seemed to consider his words carefully. "Were you?" His eyes met hers directly. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Miller. But you were in a bad way. That woodpile wouldn't have lasted 2 weeks. Sarah bristled. I don't need your pity. If you're planning to stay a bit longer. Jack nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. I'll see to it tomorrow. The days stretched into weeks. December arrived with biting cold and shorter days. Jack moved from the barn to the cabin's small second room when the temperature dropped too low for comfort. Sarah kept the rifle nearby at first, but gradually it found its way back to its place over the door. They developed routines. Jack handled the outside chores and hunting, bringing in rabbits and once, a deer that would provide meat for weeks. Sarah cooked and preserved what she could, preparing for the baby's arrival. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes silent.